We are back. Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tyko. Alan Blumkin has joined us this evening, and David Nemec has joined us. And,
David, all right.
Peter, pleasure.
Very good.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah, this is getting nice. We put a little panel together on Sunday evenings, and we learn from each other. It's terrific, and Peter guides us, and this is kind of a sad day. In the last 24 hours, not only did we lose a great rock and roller,
the greatest,
the greatest,
the
original.
Yep.
And I could make a case, the greatest columnist in New York. There have been a lot of them. One of the great ones, a real icon, Jimmy Breslin, passed away as well. And
sure did.
My first Jimmy Breslin read was a book that he wrote about the 1962 New York Mets.
Mm-hmm.
And it was entitled, "Can't Anybody Here Play This Game?"
Yep.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was quoting in the title something Casey said, just sitting there one day, just shaking his head. Can't anybody here play this game? It seemed that way with the Mets. I mentioned a few times today on podcasts regarding Jimmy Breslin that that team was worse than their statistics belied. They did the little things to lose games as opposed to the little things that win games. It was a horrible team. But his book was delightful. It called attention to the fact that it was following the Mets was like nothing anybody ever did in New York before. Nobody in New York rooted for losers. Am I correct, guys?
Yeah.
Casey Stengel, they were smart enough to make Casey Stengel the manager. And Casey Stengel was more famous than any single player on the Mets, though the Mets did have a number of former Dodgers. Duke Snider played for them. Gil Hodges played for them.
I wasn't there till '63.
Yeah, but they eventually showed up. Willie Mays showed up a little while later in an attempt to, attract the former Brooklyn Dodger and New York Giant fans. But they were all past their prime. The National League did a really nasty thing. When the American League had two new teams, I think it was Minnesota and the Los Angeles Angels. They gave them decent players. They gave them very decent players.
Yeah,
the next time,
Angels were actually competitive for a while that first year.
That's exactly right.
Just for clarification, the old Senators moved to Minnesota and the new franchise.
New Washington team.
Yeah. New franchise moved.
The new Washington franchise was the expansion team, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. But when it came time to expand into the National League, to Houston and to the New York Mets, they changed the rules somewhat. And so for the most part, these two teams got mostly rejects and kids who the other major leaguer, general managers didn't think were going to make it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the Mets were terrible.
The ones that they got that were in their prime, people like Charlie Neal and Felix Mantilla, Elio Chacon, who were pretty decent ball players, you would think, when they played part-time or didn't do a lot of alcohol like Charlie Neal was reputedly doing.
Charlie, the beginning of his career, he was very good.
He really was, but when he got to the Mets, he was terrible. And
but I hope he landed there.
But the whole idea was New York took to them in a way that only Casey could have pulled off. Let's put it that way.
That's absolutely true.
He knew how to cuddle the writers and stay up all night and make him more important than what was going on in the field. He was something special. Peter David, did you know Mr. Breslin, Jimmy Breslin?
I didn't. Only through his columns. I don't think we even ever met. No.
I've known him for the last 7 or 8 years. My wife worked with Ronnie Eldridge. She was a big shot in Democratic politics in New York City. And Wendy and Ronnie worked together back when. And after Wendy and I hooked up, when I would come to New York right before the baseball season to pick rotisserie league baseball players for my team, the Saturday night before, we would have dinner with Ronnie and Jimmy and a couple other of Wendy's friends. And Jimmy, I mean, to me, he was legendary. When I was in even in high school, when I was in high school, I used to get the New York Post, and I would cut out the columns that Jimmy Breslin wrote and that Pete Hamill wrote, and I would keep them in a file because I was just so overwhelmed by their talent. And I've been very fortunate in my book, In the Country of Brooklyn. I was able to interview Pete Hamill for one or two of the chapters. And then through Wendy, of course, I got to know Jimmy, who was just as sharp as a tack, all the way through. Apparently last night, he woke up in the middle of the night, and Ronnie woke up with him, and she fixed them some soup. And after the two of them had soup, Jimmy then, he collapsed. And he died in the middle of the night, which was very, very sad.
Yeah.
His world transcended baseball. It wasn't.
Oh, heavens yes! Heavens yes!
Yeah.
I'm reading the Damon Runyon biography that he wrote back in 1991. I'm in the middle of it. In fact, I was going to bring it. We're headed to New York on April 1st for another rotisserie draft, and I was going to bring that book with me to get Jimmy to sign for me. So that's a very small frustration. But I'm in the middle of it, and it's just mesmerizing. I mean, he had a real sort of novelist way of writing nonfiction. He was marvelous. I mean, he loved the underbelly of the city. And
he
wonderful
wrote about two-bit crimes. He wrote about mafia wise guys and what goes through their heads and what's in their life. He wrote an essay about the funeral director or the grave digger of John Kennedy, the man who buried John Kennedy.
Right.
And that stands out in my mind.
And also, he was a correspondent. I saw a special on him on the news here today that he also was corresponding with the Son of Sam.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yes, he was. He was doing that. Yes, Son of Sam would call him at the paper. Yeah, 1977. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, in one of his books, and I don't remember which one, I know you guys will, he talked about the possible fixing of the Baltimore Colts New York Jet game. And it was a reference to Bubba Smith was in there somehow. Do you the game meant so much. It meant so much for the AFL.
You're talking about Super Bowl III?
Yes, it wasn't even called Super Bowl then, but that game that was carried by two separate networks, CBS and NBC, and because basically Al Davis was commissioner, and it had a lot to do with the merging. It put AFL in an equal status almost for sponsors, and it had, and I don't remember where Jimmy Breslin wrote that. Was it which book it was? Was it Bad Guys Can't Shoot Straight, or Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, or
I don't remember either.
Gang.
But there was some controversy about the owner of the Baltimore Colts. Apparently,
Carol Rosenblum,
Carol Rosenblum had some connections to the mob. Apparently, it was interesting because his Colts were involved in that fabulous game against the New York Giants in 1958, and they were supposed to. I think the line was 6 points. I think, and as they were marching down the end with the score tied, there was a thought. There was thought that they were going to kick a field goal, and apparently Carol Rosenblum called down to his coach and said, "Absolutely not! You better, score a touchdown."
Yeah,
and they scored the touchdown.
Peter, we always said that United said, "Field goal, hell, we're going to march right down the field and cover the points." Yeah.
Cover the points, because the owner put a lot of money down on the team with the points. That's exactly right.
Later in his career, interesting you say that, later in his life, and he kind of suffered he died young, he had a paralyzed hand, but he was broke, reputedly, and involved in some sort of betting service that, so it doesn't surprise me that his head was into the game in that manner.
I never heard that Unitas had anything to do with it. My everything I heard was that Carol Rosenblum was the one behind that. Now,
I'm sure they worked
to the other game.
They knew what was happening hand in hand.
Right. And I'm sure the rest of the players did too. But you go to Super Bowl number 3 against the Jets, and that's I think where the notion was that somehow the Colts threw the game to let the Jets win, which I don't believe for a second.
Okay.
Weeb Eubank, who coached the Jets in that Super Bowl, had coached quite a number of the Colt players when he was coaching the Colts.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
But I mean,
he probably had an idea what they could do, what they couldn't do, and
plus Joe Namath had a marvelous game for the Jets, and beat them. But the idea that game was fixed, I don't know. I just don't buy it.
Well, there were rumors is all. I'm delighted. I'm a Jet fan. It was the only joy I've had with the Jets. I was a Titan fan, for crying out loud.
I was too.
Yeah.
I saw their first workout. I saw their very, very first workout. I was a kid going to camp in New Hampshire, and they had their first workout was in, I think, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, something like that. I could be wrong about the town, but it was a small town in New Hampshire, and we got in a bus and drove and got to see their very, very first practice. And their coach was that fabulous former quarterback.
The Bulldog, what was it?
Sammy Baugh.
Sammy Baugh.
Right.
Sammy Baugh. And I'm standing there, I'm 12 years old, watching Sammy Baugh. And I don't know at that time whether I even knew who Sammy Baugh was. But he's standing there with Bones McKinney, who was also a fabulous athlete in his day in the 40s. Yeah. And the two of them are standing 70 yards apart playing catch. It was just, holy mackerel. I mean, if you have any idea what it's like to throw a football 70 yards, the only other time I saw somebody throw a football 70 yards, I was with Ron Guidry at his home in Lafayette, Louisiana, and the backup first baseman for the Yankees was visiting him, and the two of them, again, were standing 70 yards apart, throwing the football to each other. And Ronnie says, you want to get in this? But to myself, I don't think so. I think I'll just watch.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, do you remember the backer? Was it Balboni, or just curious who the
No.
was?
I just can't remember his name right now. He has passed away since. He was a really fine guy, but not a big name. Not a big name. Somebody who was
it might have been Hegan Jr.
No, it wasn't he either. No.
I think
lefty. He was a lefty first baseman. Really terrific. I'll think of it an hour after the show is over.
Always the way it is. Always the way. Not always, but
often.
Oftentimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
David, your memories of reading this man, and did he influence your writing in any way?
I wish I could write like him. I wish I could, he had a very lively style that I envied. And, a New York, he definitely, you could recognize he was a New York writer, just from the language and, so I admired him and, he's a big loss to all of us.
Okay. Now, when you say a New York writer, you're a Midwestern person, and you came to live in New York. I want to know what the adjustment was for you living in New York, and just what you mean by those words, a New York writer.
Well, I really didn't know, I didn't really understand the difference until I went to a writers group which met at St. Mark's Church on the Bowery. And after I'd been in New York about 3 or 4 years, it was run by a beat writer named Seymour Krim. And Seymour Krim was a New York writer through and through. And he talked about New York writing. He said, you can bring me 10 manuscripts from people in this group, and they'll put names on them. And I'll tell you which ones. I won't tell you who wrote them, but I'll tell you whether or not this is a New York-born writer. And he was right. He was right. And there was a style, a tone, a voice, and it was amazing to me how he nailed almost every. He said he nailed 10 out of 10. He nailed like 9 out of the 10. And I soon began to recognize too. I could pick up a novel, and even though it might be set in New York, I could tell it wasn't really written by a New York writer. New York writers were grittier. And this included the women too. The women weren't bashful writing about sexual activity, whereas Midwestern women still were prior to the women's movement. Then everything started to change a bit. But he was the almost a quintessential New York writer, actually.
Yeah.
You mentioned women. Let me just ask this, Peter, and then I'll shut up. Did you gentlemen read the book Sheila Levine is Alive and Living in New York? Speaking of women writing New York style. Do you remember?
I remember the title. I don't know. I think it was made into a movie too.
Terrible movie. It's made into a terrible movie.
Okay,
terrible.
But it was an excellent book, and by a woman who just was what I would consider to be a New York writer. So if anybody wants an example of that, that's it.
And her name is?
Her name?
And her name is?
I don't remember that right off. I'll think of it an hour after the show.
That's right.
It wasn't Bones McKinley.
No, McKinney.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that team had Ben Davidson, who had been cut by the Giants, and Aldoro and Maynard, and a guy named Shockley.
Yeah, Aldoro was the first quarterback. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a fellow by the name of Shockley, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, he died early on. So he was a football death that happened to the Titans.
That was Howard Glenn died too in the locker room after
Howard
the game.
Glenn, yes. Boy,
yeah, he was a guard and he had died of a broken neck. Nobody knew he had he had played almost the entire game. And he came in the locker room, he's staggering around and losing it, by the, seconds passed, and people suddenly realized this guy's really in trouble, and then it was almost already too late. But
right.
it was it was terrible. There were a lot of deaths in the AFL in the early years. That guy, very good running back for Kansas City, Mackley Hill.
Yeah.
Right after a game, he had surgery on his knee in New York. Before he left New York, they played the Chiefs. Had played they were then the Jets. I think in '65, and he was injured in the game and stayed in New York, had surgery, and then died of a pulmonary embolism.
Wow.
I don't know. I think they got him off the table, but I don't know how far after that they got him before, we lost him.
Yeah, that's what killed
That was
Harry
the
County.
winter I heard about that news from San Antonio, Texas. I was an airman in the United States Air Force.
All right.
And that's when I enlisted, was in 1965 in November, and I heard that news, and that was incredibly shocking. Somebody else died when I was in basic training too. Another football player, and
Stone Johnson also was killed in an exhibition game. Another Kansas City player died returning a kickoff. I think he was necktied or something, and I don't think he ever got into an official game, but he did die during the exhibition season.
well,
There were others.
Peter says he remembers being in the Polo Grounds that first year. You'd go down after the game and you could greet the players. There were just so few, maybe 200 people in the stands, sometimes freezing cold. And when you were a kid, you'd want to get a chin strap from a guy, and that was just the thing. They're walking off. Can I have a chin? So saw a guy in a totally, he didn't play at all. His name was Al Jameson. He was a backup quarterback, and he gave me a chin strap, and my mother thought it was a piece of garbage when I went into the Air Force. Come on, where's the chin strap? The chin strap is is the other thing.
Along with your baseball cards, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And everything else of any sort of if a piece of clothing had a slight tear in it, jeans, a slight little tear in it, it's just comfortable. In those days, you'd have to break them in. You didn't have pre-washed stuff, and you get your jeans just broken in right. And you can't wear a tear. What would the neighbors say if you had a tear in your jeans? And I know they're still talking to this day about tears that I had. Jackson in Northridge, by the way, anybody out there listening in Jackson Heights, if you care about the tear, I don't wear jeans with tears anymore. I'm 71 years old. So that, were the days. What do you think that the league itself just like I think the ABA revolutionized the sport of basketball, do you think the AFL really helped open things up in football in that same way, guys?
Well, I was always more interested in watching the AFL than the NFL. I think part of the problem was that the AFL didn't have the safeties and the defensive backs that the NFL had. I think their defenses were weaker. But they had these fabulous quarterbacks.
Yeah, they didn't black out the home games either, like the NFL did all those years.
I didn't remember that, but I think that's a good point. Mm-hmm. And so you watch these football games where the score would be 45-42, and it was exciting. It was very, very exciting. And it was interesting to watch as the two leagues started to fight each other for the college players. And Nemec, of course, Joe Nemec, went to Alabama. And he was drafted by the NFL. But Sonny Werblin, who took over the Titans and renamed them the Jets, he was smart enough to see that Joe Nemec would be just an outrageous, fabulous personality, both for the city of New York and for the league. And when he paid Nemec a salary of $400,000, everybody was aghast. I mean, literally aghast. Players those days were making $25,000, $30,000 a year to play in the NFL, and in order to wrest Nemec away from the NFL, Werblin paid him $400,000, knowing the excitement that transaction would bring to his team. And as a result of that, the NFL cried uncle, and they negotiated a merger.
Now, what happened was that they had a tacit agreement not to honor each other's contracts. So when Pete Golenbock jumped from the Buffalo Bills to the Giants, they made Al Davis commissioner in the AFL, and he had quite a number of NFL stars ready to jump from the NFL to the AFL after the Golenbock contract happened, and that's when the merger talks started.
Yeah. And
they had to get it through. They had to get it through Congress because football was subject to antitrust.
That's
and
right.
What happened was that Hale Boggs from Louisiana headed the committee in the House, and Russell Long from Louisiana headed the committee in the Senate. So the payoff was the Saints franchise.
Ah, interesting. Wonderful.
Oh, did not know that. That is very interesting.
But we sure love him. We sure love watching him play. He was marvelous. He's still marvelous. All these years later, the guy's just terrific.
Yeah. He has a way about him. He's got those. There are some athletes, some human beings that have that aura about them.
That's right.
And you can't.
My God, he could play. Boy, could he play.
And he could lead because of that aura. And keep
the NFL team after him was the Cardinals.
That's right. Yeah.
You know what I admire about Werblin? When Nemec was drafted, he had already had a knee problem in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And there was that was one of the reasons people raised an eyebrow about giving him all that money. But Werblin backed up his bet. He signed the guy out of Notre Dame, John Ewart.
Yep.
For
not
as much money, but like $100,000 or something.
That's right.
Whatever Nemec got, he got half of. But he taught me the value of insurance, and from that standpoint, I thought that
he was also hedging his bet. Because Ewart was also a tremendous college quarterback.
Right.
So the thought was, if something was in fact wrong with Nemec's health, then Ewart would be somebody who could stand in and take his place.
Ewart did play for a while, but he never did much.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
He didn't. Never became a star, but.
I don't even know if he became a regular.
Those were good days, and
I never became a regular.
Pardon me?
He was a regular?
Regular.
Who was he a regular for?
He was never a regular.
Oh, he's never a regular. That's what I thought, yeah.
But,
no.
Hey, I'll ask David while we have him, did you ever consider a book on trivia for any other sport besides baseball?
Yeah, I did. I tried football, and I found my knowledge just wasn't deep enough. I couldn't get into the corners and nooks and crannies that I could in baseball and make the questions really fun. So I kind of gave it up. I wrote a couple of sections, tried them out on friends, and as with the baseball stuff, most of the questions were too hard. And I had to really, lighten it up in order to even get anybody at all to even take an oral quiz with me. But I couldn't get the same flavor to the questions that I could when I did my baseball trivia books.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the nature of baseball.
You put together something. You gave it a try. In other words.
I did, because I love the old AAC. My first pro game was an AAC game, and it wasn't, the Browns were in the original AFC, the Cleveland Browns, and then they moved to the NFL when the NFL and the AAC merged, and that was my first taste of NFL football. NFL football had been in Cleveland. Cleveland actually won back-to-back championships in the NFL and the AAC. In 45 and 46, the Cleveland Rams won in 45, and then the Browns came in and swept the AAC in 46. So it was a good time to be a football and baseball fan in Cleveland, and hockey fan for that matter too, because they had a terrific American League hockey team, Cleveland Barons.
I think Willie O'Ree played for them for a while too.
Barons. Yeah.
But let me ask Peter this too before we close the show, because I all the time think, what questions didn't I ask on the show? What are you working on? What are you doing of interest now? What's your project?
What I'm doing of interest. I've got one book that I absolutely cannot talk about, which is very exciting, which should be out in the fall. I'm doing another book with a rather famous professional wrestler by the name of Kurt Angle, who is about to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. I'm finishing up a book that I'm doing with a friend of mine. His name is Darrell Roussan. He's just been elected into the state of Florida's Senate. He's from St. Petersburg. He has a fabulous story. He almost died several times because he, for 20 years, was a terrible drug addict. And it's a story of how he managed to shed his addiction and basically, restore his life. And now he's a state senator. So it's a terrific story.
Okay. You mentioned what you were reading.
Yes.
The book by Breslin on Damon Runyon.
Yes.
What are you reading now, David? What right now?
What am I reading now?
Yeah.
Let's see, what am I reading now? Yeah, I might have hit a dead. Yeah, I don't think I've picked up a book in a week. The last book I reread actually, was a book by Donald Honig on. I read one from the players from the 40s and 50s. He's really excellent, and I reread him constantly because he
puts together some wonderful picture books of different eras too. His writing is excellent.
Very he does Marvel stuff.
Donald was a very close friend of Larry Ritter. In fact, Larry, when given the opportunity to write a sequel to The Glory of Their Times, basically said to, I don't want to do it. Why don't you do it? And that's how he managed to pick up.
I knew Larry Ritter his last couple of years, and I asked him about Donald Honig, and they had a major falling out because Honig is extremely right wing.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Wow.
Didn't know
that. Wow.
I know Larry Ritter through a friend of mine, Evelyn Begley, who helped care for him his last few years. I met him several times.
He was at the New York convention. He was on a panel with me and a couple, and Hallway and Dean Farm was on it too. And it was good.
He told me when he did Glory, he had this humongous tape recorder.
Humongous, yeah. Reel to reel. He had a reel to reel tape recorder. Yeah. Yeah. And he traveled around the country with this thing, and the players.
Yeah.
Were thrilled when he came. I mean, some of these guys.
But he was an economics professor at NYU.
He was at NYU.
When they had a celebration of his life after he passed, that I was invited to, one of the people that showed up was Paul Volcker, who for years was the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
For heaven's sakes, that's fabulous.
Oh.
So it's always amazed me that no one else did what Ritter did before him, or at least tried to do it. I don't know of any books.
And few did it after him with any success at all. And we have the man right here.
We did. We couldn't get Philly guys.
You wouldn't have done your book Dynasty were it not for Ritter's
Absolutely.
son.
Absolutely right.
Am I correct?
I was absolutely correct. I was so enthralled with that book. I adore it to this day, The Glory of Their Times. Yeah. What he did, to me, it's like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls is what Glory of Their Times to me is like. It's just a magnificent book. And, the interesting thing is that Larry did it. He did it because he wanted to spend summer with his son. He didn't do it for any other reason than that, except that it might be a hoot and a half, and he was curious about these people. And he got back home with all his tape recordings and his son, and he really wasn't intending to do anything with the material until those ball players started calling him. Larry, when is his book coming out? So Larry told me that he figured that he owed it to the guys who had spent so much time talking to him, and so and he did an absolutely magnificent job editing the tapes. I mean, I to this day I read this book in awe. It's just so marvelous.
He told me.
Any of you know if there were any players who were leftovers that didn't make it into the book?
There were, and then there was a subsequent edition where those players were put in.
Yeah. I have an autographed copy of the subsequent edition.
Oh, very nice.
He autographed it for me when I had him.
Huh. Who was in it? Can you give me some, anybody remember any name?
Hank Greenberg. That was the top of my head. It's been a while.
These were later guys.
Sort of later guys.
Yeah. I was hoping maybe there were some dead ball guys who we didn't get in the original.
I suspect there were probably a
couple of days. But it's been such a long time since I've read it. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Al Blumkin, what are you reading now?
I'm reading a book by what's the name? Rick Swain. It's a team-by-team history of the integration of Major League Baseball.
Huh.
It's very, very deep. He goes into the history of all the original 16 teams in order and how they wound up eventually signing black players from Jackie Robinson to Pupsy Green.
Well, let me tell you, there's a book called They Crossed the Line, which basically covers the same thing. It's in the other room. I can't get to it right now, but it's very well done. An hour after the show, I'll take it.
You'll tell me who wrote it. Yes.
Okay. Hey, thank you guys. This is
you're welcome. Always fun.
Terrific.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's the name of the game. I love hearing that more, Peter. That you're enjoying it as the three of us do. Music to my ears. Be safe. Have a good week, and we'll be back next time, and we'll do it all over again, and it will be fun.
It always is.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Okay. Have a great week. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.